Hello, everyone. I'm Perry. Welcome to Living Your Best Life with Eddie Stone, founder and CEO of Touchstone Essential. Hello, Eddie. How are you?
Hello, Perry. I'm doing great. Glad to be with you. I'm talking to you from my hotel room here in Las Vegas, where I'm attending a supply side show for people that are involved in the supplement industry. Yeah, it's a good, interesting week and meeting some new people and learning a lot.
Sounds fun to me.
It can be Las Vegas is it can be over the top, but it can also be fun. There's so many restaurants. You can almost find any kind of food and famous chefs. And I really do enjoy some of the restaurants and finding interesting things to try because, at least for me, when I travel, I don't see such a concentration of interesting restaurants like this. And then there's also shows. I'm actually coming back next week, and there's a show by a group called Cirque du Soleil. I don't know if you've heard of Cirque du Soleil, but it's kind of a performance company, and they put on these shows. And they have a Beatles show that's got a great reputation. And so I'm actually going to bring my daughter next week and my brother, and we're going to attend the Beatles. I think it's called Beatles Love. So I'm kind of excited about that. I like Beatles music.
But thank you. Even you are busy, you still have time for us to answer questions, and sharing good information with us, Eddie.
I enjoy the shows and enjoy the interactions and the questions we get. So this is a lot of fun.
Okay, I will start for the first question, all right? From Excel Bowman. A friend of mine is using zeolite since a couple of months. He is 58 years old and had normal hair until now. Since some weeks, he noticed that his hair is falling out a lot more than before. And like normal could be the reason, the zeolite.
Well, I never rule anything out, but that would really be a very unusual response to detoxing. And in fact, in my decades plus of working with zeolites, I've never heard of someone experiencing their hair falling out. I mean, I've heard of people on occasions, they'll have maybe a headache, and most likely that's because they're not drinking enough water and they're really dehydrated. That's really where the headache's coming from. On a rare occasion, someone says, oh, I had a few extra pimples around my face. And that can be a common sign of various types of detoxing. But I've never heard of that. But I won't rule it out as a possibility, but it is most likely coming from something else that's taking place. And not knowing more about the person's history or health or what their diets are like. I know the hair can be sensitive to poor diets. And so again, I'll jump back into our ongoing discussion about trying to pay attention to food and trying to avoid ultra processed food as the mostly what you consume and fresh fruits and vegetables so that you provide your body those tools. And so I can't say that that's not a factor, but I think it would be very unusual, and I've never heard of that before.
Okay, the next question from Suroy. Using zeolite, can you have wine too? With wine, I don't know, with wine or...
Meaning could you drink wine while you're using it?
Yeah, I don't know, maybe in this reason.
Yeah, there's no contraindications whatsoever for alcohol, or really, with the exception of a few cancer drugs that use heavy metals as a form of their treatment, like cisplatin and a few things like that. There's really no contraindication for that. And the mechanisms of action, the way the zeolite works, would be unaffected by using it while drinking coffee or eating a meal or drinking wine or beer or any other type of cocktail. So there'd really be no reason to think that that would get in the way.
Okay, and the last question about zeolite today, Eddie. Will zeolite flush out aluminum, fiberglass, parasites of morgellons, and parasites that cause mental illness? If not, what else should we take?
Well, that's a broad question, so let's break it down a little bit. And so what zeolites have a great reputation for is helping your body, aiding your body, I should say, in detoxing from heavy metals, positively charged metals. And so cadmium, aluminum, mercury, all these things sort of fit into that category. And we know that zeolites can be very effective in that regard at helping the body. And then zeolites also can be useful for exposures to, say, volatile organics. And so aerosols or things that almost smell very astringent, right? You can kind of tell that there's something here that's a chemical of some kind. Those are generally signs of volatile organics and difficult for the body to manage, and so should be useful in that regard. And in regards to parasites, the correlation is not a direct correlation, but it is as the body regains health, right? As you begin to clean up the body can become an inhospitable host, right? So parasites are sort of living off of the body. And if you've got them in your digestive tract, in your bowel, they're probably living off of a bad biome. You may have an overgrowth of yeast or other things like that that the parasite sort of lives off of. And so the idea there is, the more healthy you are, the less of a proper host you are for those parasites and such. And so they're going to evacuate the body. There's also herbal remedies, black cohosh and some other things. And it wouldn't take very much research on the internet to find products that are really herbal formulas specifically designed to create a sort of an unfriendly environment as a host for the parasites. And so it's not a direct correlation, but cleaning up the body using things like our super green juice, our super greens plus D, because of that combination of prebiotics, the spore formers, non-spore formers, all of that creates a more healthy flora, which is really not what that parasite wants. So the parasite wants people that are eating a diet that's very rich in starches, manufactured starches. I think, parasites love that type of environment, and a lot of sugars, because they will live off of those sugars. And those things help to create an excess, sometimes it's referred to as a yeast bloom in the bowel. And so those are the types of things. So the more healthy you are in general, the less likely you are to have problems with parasites. But I will say this, if a person has serious problems with parasites, I encourage them to see a medical professional, because if parasites go untreated, they can damage the bowel and create really long-term problems in terms of going to the bathroom, how waste is eliminated. And you don't want waste to stick around in the body. You want a transit time. It's probably closer to 24 hours, and most people are dealing with about a 48-hour period. And so if this is a persistent issue, if a simple cleanse doesn't help them out, then I really hope that they'll find a medical professional, a credentialed person with maybe some background in this regard, because there are drugs that can be effective in this regard, and you don't want to mess around, right? You don't want to let parasites go untreated. So they really should sort of really take stock of how serious the issue is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And what are you going to share with us today, Eddie?
Well, I thought we might change a little bit of our dialogue. Instead of focusing mostly on nutrition and supplements and diet, and think also about what I call the mind, right? And so for me, when I think about health, a healthy person, there's sort of a mind, body, soul. And soul is a whole nother discussion, so we'll just maybe set that aside for a later time, and there's probably people better qualified to discuss that part. But in terms of mind, a healthy mind contributes to the health of the body. And probably everybody that's watching us knows someone that really has sort of a negative outlook, maybe a negative self-view. They have a lot of, say, negative self-talk, and they wind up being people that are unhealthy, more susceptible to coughs, colds, and flus. There's plenty of research to support that, because that kind of negative energy, negative disposition changes the chemical composition in your body and impacts negatively your immune system and its performance. I mean, we know people with a positive outlook have a better performing immune system. And so we just recently published on our blog, and maybe you can provide a link to someone or in the show notes so people can see it, 5 tips for living a fulfilled life, or a life with purpose. And I know that what that means for different people is, it's just different, right? We're all different, and what fulfills one person doesn't necessarily fulfill another person. But everybody that's looking for purpose and fulfillment, there are some formulas, particularly for someone that's off track, and maybe they're a little disillusioned and concerned about their future, or maybe they feel a little bit lost. And I think that can easily happen in a modern, busy world that sometimes lacks the kind of family connections that help people. We tend to hide behind devices and computer screens, and so we lose some of those interactions that can be healthy for us. And so I have a formula, and we've expressed it in the blog, but this is really a formula that has worked for me really all my life. Now, it isn't one that I found immediately. It's something that I've kind of accumulated, these sort of approaches and these strategies. And so I thought if it's okay, I'll share that. And the first thing for me is just to sort of realize that having purpose really does give somebody a reason to get up in the morning.
Sure.
And it can give them a satisfaction, right, when they lay their head on the pillow at night. And people with a strong purpose and a sense of belonging to something that they're working with, that's an expression of themselves, whether we're talking about someone that works with the arts, or maybe someone that's helping children, or somebody that's focused on their family and their family's success, or it can be a business, or it's a job that they really enjoy. There's a happiness that goes with finding that. And so for me, the exercise, and still today at 55, and even with where I'm at in my station in life, I think about these things and I update them, because I don't want to be in a situation where months or even years down the road, I realized I wasn't really doing what I wanted to. And so you'll hear discussions about this of working and living with intentions. And that doesn't mean that that's always true, and it doesn't mean that we're always on track. But if we do have some certain rules or things we work with, they can be a guidepost for us, so that if we get off track, we can make a course correction. And so with that as sort of the summary, the biggest thing for me is to consider that, or I say acknowledge to yourself that you want to cultivate a life with purpose. Even if today you may not completely know what that looks like. When I first started to think about these kinds of issues with books I read and lectures I attended, I really didn't fully know what my purpose was. I just knew that discovering that and really taking stock of the work I was doing, did it make me feel satisfied and fulfilled, helped me then sort of navigate my way in this direction. I had a very accidental introduction into the nutrition industry in my 20s. And all of a sudden I sort of just realized, hey, this is good. And at first it was good because it was very personal to me. I was 25 pounds overweight, and I had high cholesterol, and I was pre-diabetic, and sort of this marathon that I've been on in this industry that ultimately led to me starting a business. But years later, if you'd have saw me sort of at the starting line of that, when I'm overweight, not in good shape, you might not have bet that I would have finished, right? And so I'm an example of sort of the tortoise and the hare. I'm definitely the tortoise, right? I'm slow, but I've stayed focused and made corrections along the way. And so the first one for me is make sure that you're dreaming, and you're dreaming big. Mm. I think as children, right, we know how to play games of fantasy, and we kind of envision ourselves doing certain things. Pretty common for me around the guys I grew up with in life, we sort of looked at athletes, right, the star of the game, and they were shooting the winning shot and receiving the accolades of their team success, whatever it was. And so it's easy to kind of envision myself, at the last minute making a shot, or hitting a ball, or hitting a golf ball well, and winning the tournament, whatever it happened to be. I sort of cultivated this idea of dreaming big. And I find as adults, we tend to fall into a routine. It's almost like we settle. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if we don't think we can still dream, or we don't think it's fair that we dream, or we stop believing that our dreams will come true. I just know that it's important. And if you can rekindle that spirit in yourself, I don't care if you're 40, 50, 60, 70, you can have ambition and you can have a dream. And so the first thing I tell people when I'm having this conversation with them, which I do in sort of the business side of what I do in trying to help people that want to work with us and establish a business with Touchstone, is I say, hey, what's important to you? What do you want to accomplish? What do you want to accomplish, say, in 6 months? And what might you want to accomplish in a year? And let's say that and this is a good exercise. If you can envision yourself in 5 years, or make it free, whatever you want to do, if you envision yourself in 5 years and you're successful at whatever your endeavor it is, what does a day look like for you? You know, live a day 5 years from now in your mind and think about what that looks like. And then I believe that the subconscious, in addition to your actions, can kind of help you point in that direction. You know, I knew years ago I wanted to start a business and I wanted to make a contribution to people, but I didn't completely know what that looked like. I just knew on the far end of my dream scale that that's what I wanted to do. And I didn't necessarily have the right education for it or the financial resources or a clear idea, but I just kept focusing on that bigger picture. And so for those listening, take some time to think about it. It's useful if you write it down, but you don't have to. And dream about something that is ambitious and maybe seems audacious, right? Don't let yourself just settle for little things, right? You know, you may want to improve your fitness to the point that you have the body view of an Olympic athlete, right? With muscles or whatever it happens to be. And it could be anything here. You're a great teacher, whatever it happens to be, or your kids are giving you the Father of the Year mug and t-shirt, right? And, you know, that may seem far-fetched at first, but if you aren't able to see that end goal in some capacity, then it's difficult to pull these other things together. And so that's one for me, is to dream and dream big, because I think that's really crucial. And don't over evaluate that initial dream. Just sort of think about it and let it sit there and let that kind of incubate. The second one is, you've got to be careful to not let fear distract you, because it's really easy to come up with reasons why an idea will not work. I mean, when I first thought about starting a business, there were so many reasons why it wasn't going to work that I stopped writing them down because I would really not make any progress. You know, the fear of what's in front of you can be debilitating, or maybe a better word is paralyzing. And so you never take that first step. And, you know, I'm not the first person to say this, but you hear people say, you know, 1,000-mile journey, you know, begins with one step, right? And that's really true. But if I'm so fearful of what might happen along the way, then that fear will dictate my life. And what I've discovered is people that are completely caught up in that fear wind up living a smaller life than they're capable of. And one of my purposes in this world, I believe, is to help people find the full measure of their potential, whatever that happens to be. I mean, it is ingrained in my mission statement and what I do every day. Mostly for me, that means I try to help them find the better part of their health with subtle or dramatic changes or new habits or whatever it happens to be. But if you're fearful, right, if I'm fearful that no one will have an interest in my ideas, then I'll probably never open my mouth. And so it's important to me that you recognize fear and you compartmentalize it. Yes, you may get rejected, right? People may say not just no, they might say, no, you dummy, right? That's okay, right? That's just words, and those words only matter as much as you allow them to. The third thing for me is learning how to live in the moment. Now, that doesn't mean to me that we have an overindulgent life. You know, you could take that to an extreme where you didn't worry about your health and you just only ate dessert, or those things that were just completely filled with pleasure. And so living in the moment, I don't mean it in that respect, but I do mean that when you're with somebody, really be with somebody. You know, really listen to them, really look at them. I mean, one of the best gifts anybody that's listening to us on this show can give to another human being is to really look at them, pay attention to them, and listen to them. Stephen Covey, famous writer, author, you know, he talked about listening with the intent to understand, not reply. And you'll be amazed at the sense of relationships that develop around you if people really feel that you are really listening to them, you're really paying attention to them, because it's not very often in someone's life that they get that sort of undivided attention. And that's a part of sort of living in the moment. In our article, we quoted Winnie the Pooh when he asked Piglet, he said, "What day is it?" And Piglet said, "It's today." And Winnie the Pooh said, "Oh, it's my favorite day." And even though that's a child's book that comes from, it's relevant in that wherever you are, make the most out of it. On the journeys that I've had, and I promise for anybody listening to us, you're going to have bad days along the journey, right? You're going to have days where you don't feel good and you go to bed at night thinking, I just need this day to end. And fair enough, right? This is sort of how life can be. But learning to embrace the day, and if all you can do is say, with this day, I learned some things not to do, then that's okay too, right? That's taking advantage of the moment. Because here's a real important lesson that I've learned. Don't let yourself waste too many days. I'd rather you not waste any, but don't let yourself waste too many days because you can't call them back. As time passes, it's past. Now, we can learn things from our past and journeys we've taken, but it's important to live in this moment and realize that once a day is gone, it's gone and it's gone forever. And just to kind of give that some quantity, most of the people listening to this broadcast are going to live to be between, say, 85 and 95 years of age, based upon current statistics. And if they're working hard on their health, they're probably going to blow past 100, right? But if you say live to, say, 85 years of age, that means you've got about 4,500 Mondays in your life. You've got about 4,500 Tuesdays in your life. You got about 4,500 Wednesdays, right? That's about how many Mondays, Sundays, and Saturdays you have. Well, when I really started to quantify that, I recognized I didn't want to waste a Tuesday. I mean, 4,500, maybe it sounds like a pretty good number, but I didn't think it sounded like a big number. And I thought to myself, man, oh man, I don't want to waste that. One of my frustrations when I travel, and I travel by air mostly. And so, I've got that luxury of how fast you're able to get somewhere. But I traveled most of the day on Tuesday out here. And it was easy for me to kind of say to myself, oh, it's a wasted day, right? I just traveled. But I sort of made myself stop and say, you know what? What's going on with this person sitting next to me? Let me speak to them, right? Maybe nobody's really spoken to them today. Or maybe use my best manners, no matter how tired I am, with the stewardess or whomever else I'm coming in contact with, because I don't know what else is going on in their life, right? Maybe they've got something that's really bothering them, or they've got a real difficult issue at home, right? And so maybe if just one of their customers is just extra nice, right, it might bring something that's a sense of purpose and satisfaction to them about the work they do. And so there's different ways to make a day worthwhile that don't have to do anything with money or anything else. It's just about, being that human being that's making a contribution with your behaviors. I've mentioned before on the show, I'm a big fan of Viktor Frankl. And Dr. Frankl wrote a book, A Man's Search for Meaning. And it's a manuscript that he developed, and then he was captured by the Germans during the World War II, and he spent a great deal of time in an encampment in Germany, and many of the people he went in there with actually were killed during this period of time. And he held on to this belief that the last of the human dignities is your ability to choose. No matter what's happening to you externally, I can choose my response to it. I don't have to give that over to someone else. And I think that's an important thing to recognize, and that's about living in the moment. So that's number 3. Number 4, now this is sort of the mechanical part of this, but if people will do this, really helps. Keep a journal. Journaling, particularly if you'll accumulate your journals and go back on occasion and visit them, right, and say, man, look what I was writing about 5 years ago. It can be very cathartic. It can be uplifting to see how you've advanced in the process along the way. And journaling doesn't have to be about writing whole pages of information, right? It doesn't necessarily have to take that form. Some people probably, that's what they do. But it can just be a couple sentences. Today was a good day. Today was a bad day. Today I accomplished this, but I didn't accomplish it. Whatever, just sort of putting it down on paper brings some quantity to it that allows you a learning experience from what's going on in your life. Another way to do that is with vision boards. And maybe for some people, a vision board is much easier. And so I really think that's important. I mean, if you have trouble thinking about what I mentioned earlier, which say, what would a successful life for me look like in 5 years, then try to do it visually. I mean, does that mean you own a fancy car? Now, I don't think fancy cars provide fulfillment, but maybe that means that a person was able to be successful. Does that mean in a poor country somewhere in the world, you've got a school that you can look at and say, you know what, I helped donate some money and some of my time and labor to building that school for some very impoverished people. I mean, it can be anything that you find noble, satisfying, and fulfilling, but having the visual image will help you get there. And so I'm a big believer, you can do it with electronics, but you can also cut out some pictures and put them in a scrapbook. You know, I know plenty of people that have things around the mirror in their bathroom so that they would get up every day. They're sort of reminded about where they're going and what they want to accomplish, right? And so don't be afraid to do this. Even if it seems at first, maybe this is just a little bit juvenile, I promise that the mind, if it sees that you're serious about this, right, you're focused on it and you've got a vision of where you want to go, I promise some of those things you may not get completely there, but you're going to get a lot closer than you will if you ignore these sort of exercises along the way. And then the final thing, and this goes back a little bit to point 3 about living in the moment. The final thing is to really watch out for negative emotions. Mm-hmm. Really observe yourself in how you react to people. I see folks that driving on the highway sort of lose their mind because they feel like they were wronged by another car that pulled in front of them. I think there's a term, road rage. I don't know if you've got that term in Thailand, but road rage is the thing we hear about. I mean, to the point where on occasion you'll read about somebody took a gun and shot at another person's car. Or they pulled over on the side of the road and they got into a fist fight. Now, I know those things are pretty extreme, but things that you can't control that you get caught up in now control you. And I think that life is so precious. Go back to the 4,500 Mondays or Tuesdays or whatever, Wednesdays or whatever you have in life, and to think that I allowed my day to be ruined by a bad commute, right? That's not a good direction to go. Maybe it's a bad interaction with a coworker. Maybe it's a bad interaction with your spouse or your parents, right? Your interactions with your parents can probably affect your emotions about as much as anything, or with your kids. If you don't find a way to compartmentalize those emotions, and if you allow those emotions to take you over, and they do take you over, and there's a chemical process in your body, and you're producing chemicals that create a negative after effect, right? It's not good for you, and you've lost a day because you're pissed off about something, right? That is going to get in the way of finding purpose. Now, as I say that, Perry, I am not trying to tell anybody listening that I don't get upset and that I don't have negative emotions, but I've learned over time to pay attention. And when I see myself going down that path, I'll stop myself, and I'll stop myself pretty quickly. And here's an exercise. Maybe this is sort of the last thing that I'll give to folks, and sort of tools and things to use. When I'm fearful, as we talked about in number 2, when I'm really angry, when my head is consumed by these things that just seem overwhelming, I make myself sit down, even if I've woken up in the middle of the night and I'm worried about a product shipment to Japan. I mean, whatever it might be that's affecting me, I'm concerned about, whether it's financial or family, I write it down. Mm-hmm. Somehow for me, and I think this is true for a lot of people I've worked with, is that when you write it down and quantify it, it makes it smaller. It looks smaller. When I was getting ready to start this business, there were so many obstacles, it was overwhelming. And I found that, well, if I fail, because that was a big fear for me that I had to overcome, is the fear of failure. If I failed, what would that look like? Mm-hmm. And it turns out that the sun was still going to come up tomorrow. And I would still be able to find work or employment or something to feed my family. Nobody was going to starve. My biggest issue would have been I would have been completely embarrassed. And in my mind, humiliated. But then I thought to myself, well, what about people I know that have tried something ambitious but failed? Do I think of them as a failure? Or do I admire their guts and spirits because they tried? And in most cases, they keep trying. And what I realized was when I'm looking on from the outside at someone going through what I was worried about, I admire them. Mm-hmm. And I think how daring for them to try that. You know, the world is made better by people that try things that aren't easy, right? And so I quantify those fears, and it's made a big difference for me. And I'll go back and read them on occasion, and then I tear them up because I realize they're so much smaller once I put them on paper than they really were. And so that's really what I wanted to share today and speak to those that we're talking to that are looking to find purpose. Now, I'm not trying to talk about it in respects to finding spirituality and things like that. I'm talking mostly about finding fulfilling work or living a life that's full of fulfillment day in and day out, whether that is donating your time or whatever that happens to be. And my formula is first to dream big, just to recap. Don't let fear take over and stop you from dreaming big.
And the fear part is like almost everybody have this part, you know, fear of unknown, you know, and then you have to go through it, you know.
You're exactly right. And I'm not even trying to say that it's easy, but if you've got a way to react to it so that you're not left with, oh, I'm so fearful, what do I do? Because it can create a chaos in your mind, and it can be debilitating, and ultimately may even lead to depression. You know, people that don't have a strong purpose or fulfillment in their life often deal with issues associated with depression. Now, those can be things that are medically related issues, and so won't necessarily be addressed by these kinds of things. But for most of us, if we're dreaming big and we don't let fear take over and we live in the moment, and for me, that means wherever you are, be there, right? Listening to people, looking at people, giving them that humanity, because that in and of itself right there is a way to feel a purposeful life. I mean, if you didn't do anything except you know what I want to be the best listener that the world has ever seen. You'll be a cherished and beloved person and fulfilled on a daily basis. The vision board, likewise important. And then the last thing is learning to let go of those negative emotions because they don't serve a purpose. Letting go of negative emotions is one way to free your mind up to do the things it was intended to do. So that's what I wanted to share today, and I appreciate you giving me the format to do that.
It's all good today, Eddie. You know, like many people when they listen or when they watch a person that is very successful, so they will say, okay, it's easy for you to say that, but actually that person, they had to go through everything like this too, right? All this beautiful.
Yeah, that's right. And I, one of the things that's helpful for me is I've learned that at the end of the day, we're all alike, or we have more in common than not. We're not all alike. And some people, they're so brazenly confident, and there's probably some other shortcomings they have. They don't pay attention to the same thing, but everybody, I believe, feels vulnerable. And so how do you react to that vulnerability? And I think you embrace it. And I think you don't you shouldn't be bothered by expressing that vulnerability. I've learned that it makes you human to other people. Your chances of influencing and working with them is much greater. And just realizing that life is not perfect. You're not going to be perfect. All your decisions won't be perfect. And all of this will not mean that you don't have any negative days. It just means you'll develop tools to help you work through them on that path to that fulfilled life that you want.
Mm-hmm. Very good indeed today. Like every time, Eddie. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks everybody for listening.
I have to dream big too now.
I can tell that you do, right? You've started your own YouTube channel with tens of thousands of people that view the shows. How exciting is that, right? That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I do what I like too, so I'm happy.
Yeah, good for you. That's great. Okay. We can see it on your face.
Okay, Eddie, thank you for being here with us. I see you again next time. Okay, have a wonderful time there.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.